Beatrix, thank you, and good afternoon, everybody. Why am I here? That's the first question, isn't it? Well, I'll tell you why I'm here, because I've been invited here by Beatrix, who I've known for some years, many years before she even considered, I think, standing for elected politics, and I've sat with her. She sat in my group in the European Parliament for a period of time, and she's somebody who, as you will know, is increasingly used on English language, whether it's the BBC World Service or whatever it is, to give some interpretation of this new movement that now exists in Germany. So I'm here because it's her personal invitation, and I'm very pleased to support her and to say to people, having worked with her, I believe her and know her to be an honourable person committed to change. I don't have any formal link or association with the AFD at all. So I'm not here on behalf of the party, it's a personal invitation. But I would say that it is very interesting, whatever perspective one takes on the AFD, and they've had their problems, as new political parties do. I know, 25 years in UKIP, and I've seen splits and divisions and arguments, and this always happens with any new political movement. But we are, I think, on the verge of something very interesting happening, in that the biggest and most powerful member state of the European Union is about to get a voice of opposition in the Bundestag, and that of itself is a very big moment. I also, while I'm here, would like to attempt to inject something into the German election debate that seems to me to be somewhat absent. I mean, last Sunday there were 20 million people watching Merkel and my good friend Martin Schulz, who I've known for years, and amazing that you can have this big debate with 20 million people watching, and nobody talks about Brexit. Nobody talks about what the implications of Brexit might be for Germany. It's as if they'd rather not discuss this in the election. It's all too embarrassing to admit that their beloved European project is now about to be exited by one of the big countries. And I am very keen, if I possibly can, to inject something into that debate. Brexit's very important for Germany. The United Kingdom is very important for Germany. We are a very serious marketplace. You know that anyway. When you look at the numbers, they're truly astonishing. I mean, you are selling us £30 billion worth of goods a year more than we are selling you. In fact, in some years, the figure is wider than that. There are a minimum 1.3 million jobs in Germany that are directly related to trade with the United Kingdom. And this is what's so bizarre. All the big multinational companies, the European Union, those in British politics who are known as the Ramonas, those who find it difficult to accept the referendum result, are telling us that if the UK leaves the single market and there's no tariff-free deal between us and the European Union, we will fall off a cliff edge. It will be a catastrophe for trade and business. Well, surely, why is that argument not being put by those people here in the German elections? Because if it's a catastrophe for us, it's a catastrophe for many companies and workers in Bavaria and other parts of Germany. And I would argue very strongly that Germany has the most powerful voice of any nation state within the European Union, and it would be very strongly in the interests of the German economy, German companies and German workers for the next German Chancellor to say to Mr. Barnier, to Mr. Juncker, Tajani, Tusk, Verhofstadt and all of them, will you please grow up and start behaving? What the UK did was to leave political union. It doesn't want to leave and has no desire to cut itself off from you or anybody else. And why don't we just continue with a sensible free trade agreement? And that debate has been completely absent from this campaign. And I think it's very, very important because, it's becoming clear to me with these Brexit negotiations that Brussels, the European Union, is now acting on behalf of itself. And it's not surprising, is it, really? I mean, big salaries, great lunches, pensions you couldn't get anywhere else in the rest of the world, but they're not acting in the interests of the member states and the people of the Union. Thank you.
Mr. Farage, my name is Janos Stelker. I work for Politico here in Berlin. You're visiting a very Europhile country. So if you look at polls, there's 4 out of 5 people in Germany who support European integration, further European integration. And polls also show that since Brexit, since your decision to leave the European Union, this support has been on the rise. It's been growing. How do you explain that?
Oh, they're all pro-European countries. You know, I go to Dublin, I'm told, oh, you know, Mr. Farage, you're wasting your time coming here. The Irish are very strongly in favour of the European project, and then you examine the truth, and twice in the last 16 years they voted against European treaties. So I'm always a bit suspicious when I hear this argument about people being pro-European. Look, I think for a lot of people across Europe, Brexit was a shock. And the way in which Brexit was sold to them was a shock. The idea that somehow we are deserting Europe. And I want to be absolutely clear. It's very interesting. If you look at all the players that made up the Leave campaign in the United Kingdom, every single prominent player said, we want the best possible relations with our European neighbours. We want trade. We want cooperation. We want reciprocity, student exchanges, all those things. We want to work together to deal with international crime, drug trafficking, human trafficking, pollution that crosses borders, all of those things. So it's just very important that I make that point, that for those in Europe who feel that somehow the Brits have simply turned their backs on our friends in Europe, that is not true. What we said in the referendum was we wanted no further part in political union. We'd prefer to be a democratic country, make our own laws, control our own borders, and look not just to Europe, but perhaps to a bigger, broader world beyond. So I think there has been something of a reaction, I would go with that, in some European countries because of the way this has been sold. And I think it is very important for us and for everybody here that we get the message across. Actually, we want the best possible relations. And really, Brexit is about normality. I mean, the European project goes against what's happening in the whole of the world. Across the whole world, every year, artificial states divide down on the principle of national self-determination because people want to govern themselves. It's only in Europe that we've tried to go in completely the opposite direction. And the significance of what's happening here, whatever the short-term polls may say, here's the significance. I can remember, because I've been in UKIP, it feels like for life, frankly, but I can remember when advocating that we should leave the European Union was a real minority sport, all right? It was considered to be, pretty kooky, pretty weird, pretty odd, only a sort of real, sort of socially inadequate misfit, basically, would believe in leaving the European Union. And what happened was we managed, ironically, to win seats in the European Parliament, which gave us a voice in national media and elsewhere. And once people start to hear an alternative argument, things can change. So the significance is that we do have Eurosceptic movements and Eurosceptic representation now right across Europe, north, south, east and west. And this, in a sense, is a breakthrough moment in Germany for a voice of opposition. Now, whether that then leads to Germany becoming a much more Eurosceptic country will depend how the AfD representatives perform inside the Bundestag. And they will have, on all of them, on their shoulders, a pretty heavy weight of responsibility.
Michelle Martin from Reuters. Do you think Brexit is actually going to happen? And on Theresa May, what do you think of her and how long will she last?
Do I think Brexit will happen? Brexit has to happen. And anyone that thinks, and again, one of these ridiculous stories that gets put around, that somehow there is buyer's remorse, that we're all dreadfully regretting this decision, is quite the opposite, actually. I mean, the polling's really interesting, that you've got half a dozen, and some of them quite big sample polls. And the range now, the latest range I saw was 68 to 70% of Brits now want Brexit to go ahead. And that's because quite a few of those who voted Remain say, we took a democratic decision, we should continue. And there's another interesting percentage of the British people who say, we voted Remain because we were told our house price would collapse. We were told we'd lose our jobs. We were told that almost a plague of black locusts would descend upon our country. And we can see that's not the case. So public opinion is very resolute in thinking this should happen, so it will happen. However, what the shape of it is, and whether in reality we've left in name only, remains to be seen. We're leaving the Treaty of Rome, yes. We're leaving the Union, but there is, whilst the public have gone in one direction, the political class are going very strongly in the other, and there are a variety of attempts to keep us in things like the single market or the customs union, all the things that we voted to free ourselves from. As for the Prime Minister, she's not the warmest or most humorous person that has ever occupied number 10 Downing Street, and she was, of course, a Remainer. And she struggled when Jeremy Paxman asked her 4 times in one interview. He said, well, Prime Minister, having been a Remainer, are you now a convert to the Leave cause? And on 4 occasions, she sort of said, well, we'll do what the will of the people asked us to do, which I thought was a pretty unconvincing performance from a Prime Minister who was trying to win an election on the basis that Brexit meant Brexit. I would say this, being as objective, and I really mean this, as I can be, I would say this. Number one, she has to stamp her authority on the party and do so pretty damn quickly. Because we've had a period of time where on a weekly basis, the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the Foreign Secretary contradict each other on virtually every issue. So it looks rudderless. She must assert her authority on the party, and I think she has to assert her authority on the renegotiation process, where frankly, we are now up against plain pig-headedness from virtually everybody in Brussels who are being unwilling to bend and who seem, as I say, to put the interests of preserving their projects and lifestyle in Brussels above that of the interests of all the countries of Europe. And I would say to you, if she doesn't do those 2 things, doesn't get some sense of order back into her own party and direction back into where the renegotiations are going, then I think the whispering campaign will go from being something that is being done in private to being done in public, and she might not last till Christmas. I think she has the opportunity to stamp her authority, but she really, really needs to do it.
Is there, in your opinion, much difference between Chancellor Merkel and Martin Schulz on policy? You have suggested in the past, do you think Angela Merkel may be better for Brexit? What did you mean by that? And also, if I could, a second question on any potential future exits of other member states from the European Union. What do you think about that, considering that from the outside, Brexit looks quite the shambles as we look in on it?
Well, okay, Schulz versus Merkel. Well, they agree on virtually all the big things, because they are both committed and signed up to the European project, and it makes me laugh to hear Martin Schulz say, oh, well, you know, it might take 20 years to integrate 1 million new people. Well, actually, when the call went out from Mrs. Merkel and Mr. Juncker, to be fair, that we'll take anyone that sets foot on European soil, Martin Schulz was one of the first to shout down and condemn anyone that criticised that process. Now, on the big stuff, you virtually can't put a cigarette paper between Merkel and Schulz. Why did I say that I thought Merkel might be better for Brexit? Well, Schulz is a fanatic. He is a pro-EU fanatic. How do I know this? Well, I've had him snarling at me for the last 18 years. Not so much as President of the Parliament, where, to be fair to him, he has actually managed to, in the plenary, I think, be pretty objective, not always, but certainly as leader of the Socialist group, he made it clear in no uncertain terms that he thought those that supported nation-state democracy were bad people. I mean, the Irish referendum on Lisbon, he said this vote opens the door to fascism. Well, you are dealing with a fanatic, and I think Schulz is one of those people who would, along with Juncker and Barnier and the others, put the interests of Brussels above a sensible renegotiation. Mrs. Merkel, well, she's been around a long time. She certainly, in terms of current contemporary European leaders, has more authority than all the rest of them, although she's made some pretty big, major historic errors herself. But I think Mrs. Merkel is more likely to listen to the voice of German industry and listen to the voice of German workers, provided Germany has that debate in public and puts that pressure upon her. So, you know, I'm not a big fan of either, given where they stand on the big issues, but maybe Mrs. Merkel would listen to the logical, and it is the logical business argument, which is that a continuing free trade deal with the United Kingdom is massively in the interests of Germany and most of the other member states of Europe. As for who else is going to follow us out, well, look, if the UK was seen in 2 to 3 years' time to have got out of the European Union fairly harmoniously, to have struck up new trade relationships with Australia, Canada, America, India, and goodness knows what other new parts of the world, then I think there'd be all sorts of countries like Denmark, etc., queuing up to leave. And that, I think, is what is in the thinking of Juncker and Barnier. That they somehow say, we're going to make this impossible, we're going to make this difficult, otherwise our union will disintegrate. And whatever high-minded ideals the union might have had back in the 1950s, it's now become about itself. You know, I'd turn the question around the other way to people who support the European Union. You know, what is it for anymore? Is it for peace? Well, is there any threat in Europe of there not being peace? None that I can see. Is it in the interests of workers and people? Well, no. Otherwise, a free trade deal with the United Kingdom would be signed up to. And I honestly don't think, whichever way the Brexit process goes, the massive contradictions that exist between the north and the south of Europe in terms of the economy and the east and west of Europe culturally, something that is being showed over the migrant quotas issue. I do not believe this European Union is going to be there in 10 years' time, and I do think something much better and more constructive can take its place.
Philip Alterman from The Guardian. Mr. Farage, you're sharing a platform today with a party whose leader in Thuringia last year called for a 180-degree turn in the culture of commemorating for the crimes of Germany in the Second World War. Do you agree with that statement, Mr. Farage? Would you like to help make Germany great again?
I don't think you were listening, were you, earlier? Sorry. I said I have no formal link with the party at all, none whatsoever. They're in a different political family to me in the European Parliament. I'm here as a guest, and I will personally endorse Beatrix von Storck, and that's as far as it goes. Nice try, but sorry, doesn't work.
I have a question to Mr. Farage. You have another link to Germany. Your wife is German. Do you also have a German passport by now?
I've actually got more links to Germany than that, because unlike most people in politics, before I got involved in this, I actually had a proper job, and I was involved in the metals business, and of course Germany are major consumers of non-ferrous metals, so I've travelled very extensively in this country, done a lot of business in this country, and made a lot of friends in this country, including somebody I married, as you say. Yeah, I know there was all sorts of stories circulating about me being seen at the German embassy, etc. I can put it beyond doubt, I have not applied for German citizenship. Okay. And I'm not sure if it's going to be Merkel v. Schulz, whether I get it anyway.
Benedikt Peters von der Süddeutschen Zeitung. Anschließend an den Kollegen vom Guardian, Herr Farage, der Sie eben gefragt hat, zu den Äußerungen von Herrn Höcke zum Denkmal der Schande. Da haben Sie ja geantwortet, dass Sie keine Verbindung mit der Alternative für Deutschland hätten und nicht antworten möchten. Wenn man sich jetzt das Podium anguckt, auf dem Sie sitzen, ich weiß nicht, wie oft da jetzt Alternative für Deutschland steht, ich glaube 40 Mal ungefähr. Wie passt das denn zusammen?
I'm a guest, dear boy. I told you that earlier. No, look, the AfD leadership have other political affiliations in Europe, and they're not with me. All right, that's the way it is. But I'm perfectly happy to come here on a personal level, support Beatrix von Storck, and try, I might fail, but try to get a proper debate going in the biggest, richest, most important, powerful country in Europe about not just the shape of Brexit, but perhaps even the shape of the European project to come. You know, one thing, and despite the question I was asked earlier, one thing we see across the whole of Europe is a desire for genuine reform. Now, it's proved very difficult to reform the European Union, but if there's one country that could, you know, post-Brexit, say to Brussels, look, the reason the Brits left is because you're behaving so badly and you're taking away so much of people's freedom, liberty and democracy. And if there's one country that could actually make a difference to the Brexit process and the future shape of the European Union, it is the biggest, strongest member state and the one that pays the biggest membership fee to be a part of it. And if I can help in any way to at least get that debate going, it'll be well worth me being here.